For the longest time, I thought I had it all figured out. I'm Andy, a 36-year-old regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, a gig that keeps me on the road more often than I'd like. My wife, Jenna, is 34, and she's an engineer. Smart as hell. We've been married for 7 years and have a 6-year-old daughter, Emily, who's basically my whole world. The three of us lived in a cozy, suburban home with a squeaky screen door and a backyard we swore we'd turn into a garden someday. Jenna and I met in college. She was that woman who always had her hand up in class, while I was the guy who showed up late, hoping my charm would carry me through. She laughed at my bad jokes. I marveled at her intellect. And before we knew it, we were a unit, a real team. But even the best teams can fall apart. And I'm here to tell you how my so-called dream life crumbled into a million jagged pieces. It started small. That's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. It sneaks in quietly, like a slow leak in a tire, until one day you're careening off the road, wondering what the hell happened. It began with Jenna working late more often. At first, I didn't think much of it. She's always been dedicated to her career, and honestly, I admired that about her. But then there were the hush phone calls. The way she'd glance at her phone and quickly shove it in her pocket when I walked into the room. The perfume. God, the perfume. Jenna has worn the same brand of perfume for years, something floral and light. But suddenly, there was a new scent clinging to her skin, muskier, heavier, different. I brushed it off, because that's what you do when you love someone. You give them the benefit of the doubt, even when your gut is screaming otherwise. One Thursday, I came home early from a canceled meeting. Emily was at a friend's house, and I thought, maybe I'll surprise Jenna with dinner. But as I pulled into the driveway, there it was, a silver sedan I didn't recognize parked in front of my house. My pulse quickened. I told myself it could be anything, a friend, a work colleague, a delivery guy. I walked through the side door where we didn't have a camera set up, big mistake. And immediately I knew something was wrong. There was a strange energy in the air, like static before a storm. And then I heard it, a muffled laugh, followed by a shushing sound. The living room was empty, but I noticed 2 wine glasses on the coffee table, one with Jenna's signature lipstick on the rim and the other bare. My stomach churned as I followed the faint sound of voices upstairs. Our bedroom door was ajar, and there was a shadow moving on the wall. I hesitated. Every fiber of my being wanted to turn around, leave the house, and pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't. My feet carried me forward, and when I pushed the door open, the sight that greeted me will be seared into my memory until the day I die. Jenna was sitting on the edge of our bed, her hair disheveled, her face flushed. Across from her stood a man I'd never seen before, casually buttoning his shirt like he had all the time in the world. "What's going on?" My voice cracked, but I kept it steady enough. Jenna's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide. She stammered something incoherent, but it was the man who spoke first. "Relax, buddy. It's not what it looks like." I've never understood that phrase. What else could it possibly be? Not what it looks like? I repeated, my voice a mixture of disbelief and rage. "You're standing in my bedroom, half-dressed with my wife, and you want to tell me it's not what it looks like?" Jenna stood abruptly, wrapping her cardigan tightly around herself like it could shield her from the weight of what was happening. Her face was pale, her lips trembling as if she was about to say something, anything, to defuse the situation. The guy, though, he didn't even flinch. He was taller than me, broad-shouldered with a smugness that seemed etched into his very being. He gave me this condescending smirk, like I was some naive idiot who'd just stumbled into a situation he couldn't handle. "Look, man," he said, "this is between me and Jenna. You should leave us to talk." And that was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the arrogance of his words, or the casual way he brushed me off. It was the fact that Jenna, my Jenna, wasn't denying any of it. She wasn't pushing him out the door or screaming at him to leave. She was just standing there, frozen, like a deer in headlights. "Talk," I said, stepping into the room and slamming the door behind me. "Oh, we're going to talk, all right." Jenna finally found her voice, but it came out in a panicked rush. "Andy, please. Let me explain." "Explain what?" I shot back, the venom in my tone surprising even me. Explain why you're letting this douchebag parade around in our house like he owns the place. Explain why you've been sneaking around behind my back. Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't about to let her play the victim. Not this time. The guy, to his credit, or maybe his stupidity, didn't back down. Listen, man, I get that you're upset. Upset. I cut him off, my voice rising. You think this is upset? This is me keeping myself from breaking every bone in your smug face, so I suggest you shut the hell up. That wiped the smirk off his face, but only for a moment. Fine, he said, grabbing his shoes from the corner of the room. I'll leave. But Jenna, you and I are going to talk later. He had the audacity to kiss her on the cheek before walking past me like he didn't have a care in the world. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to grab him by the collar and throw him down the stairs. Instead, I stepped aside and let him go, saving my anger for the person who truly deserved it. When the front door slammed shut behind him, the silence in the house was deafening. I turned to Jenna, who was now sitting on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands. How long? I asked, my voice cold and steady. How long has this been going on? She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Andy, How long, Jenna? I demanded, cutting her off. Don't give me excuses. Don't try to soften the blow. Just tell me the damn truth. She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she might try to lie. But then she took a deep breath and said, 3 months. 3 months. 90 days. A quarter of a year. All while I'd been working late, busting my ass to provide for our family, and thinking we were happy. The weight of her betrayal hit me like a freight train, knocking the air out of my lungs. Why? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Why would you do this to us? Jenna shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. I don't know. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Like this? I repeated, incredulous. So you had a plan? Did you think I wouldn't find out? Or were you hoping I'd just roll over and let you have your little affair in peace? She didn't answer. Instead, she sat there, staring at her hands like they held the answers to all her problems. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to break everything in sight. But I didn't, because in that moment, I realized something. I didn't just feel angry. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and worst of all, foolish for ever trusting her. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm raging inside me. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice firm. You're going to pack a bag and leave. Tonight. Her head snapped up, panic flashing across her face. Andy, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. Fix this? I laughed bitterly. You can't fix something that's already broken. Jenna stared at me, her face twisted in disbelief. Andy, please, she whispered. Let me explain. Just don't make any decisions right now. Please. I folded my arms, leaning against the doorframe like I needed it to hold me upright. Every part of me was screaming to throw her out on the spot, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not without hearing the explanation she was so desperate to give. Not because I thought it would change anything, I just wanted to know the depth of her betrayal. Fine, I said finally, my voice as cold as the chills settling in my chest. You've got 5 minutes. Start talking. She nodded quickly, like she'd been given a lifeline, and started wringing her hands. It wasn't planned, Andy, she began, her words coming out in a tumble. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I raised an eyebrow. That's your big defense? It just happened? What are you, a teenager making out at prom? Her cheeks flushed, but she pressed on. You've been so busy with work, and I've been feeling disconnected. Lonely. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. And then he noticed me. He made me feel. Don't you dare. I snapped, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. Don't you dare blame this on me. I've been working late because someone has to keep this family afloat. Someone has to pay for this house, your car, Emily's school. Don't stand there and tell me you did this because I wasn't around enough. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but I wasn't in the mood for pity. Not now. Not from her. You could have come to me. I continued, my voice rising. You could have talked to me. Hell, you could have yelled at me, screamed at me, thrown a damn vase at my head. But no, you decided to screw some random guy instead. That was your solution. It wasn't like that, she insisted, her voice cracking. I never stopped loving you, Andy. I swear. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Love? You think this is love? Newsflash, Jenna. Love isn't screwing someone else because your husband works too much. Love isn't lying to my face every day for 3 months. Love sure as hell isn't bringing that guy into our house. Into our bed. She paled at that, her lips parting as if to respond, but no words came out. I shook my head, running a hand through my hair. You're unbelievable, I muttered. Absolutely unbelievable. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room was thick with tension, the air so heavy it felt like it might crush us both. I wanted to walk away, to end this conversation and never look back. But there was one question still gnawing at me, refusing to be ignored. Did Emily see him? I asked, my voice quieter now, but no less intense. Jenna's eyes widened in horror. No. God, no. I would never let that happen. I studied her for a long moment, searching for any sign of a lie. She seemed genuine, but then again, I thought she was genuine for the past 7 years. How could I trust her now? How could I ever trust her again? Pack your things, I said, my tone final. You can stay with your sister or a friend, I don't care. But you're not staying here. Andy, please, she begged, stepping toward me. Don't do this. Don't throw away everything we've built together. I took a step back, keeping the distance between us. You already threw it away, I said, my voice colder than I intended. You just didn't have the guts to tell me until I walked in on it. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she nodded, defeated, and turned toward the closet to grab a bag. I watched her pack, every movement of hers slow and deliberate, like she was stalling for time. Once she was done, she stood by the door, her suitcase in hand. What about Emily? She asked softly, not meeting my eyes. I'll tell her you're visiting your sister, I replied. We'll figure out the rest later. Jenna nodded, her lips trembling as she turned to leave. But before she walked out the door, she stopped and looked back at me, her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Andy, she whispered. For everything. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just stood there, watching as the woman I thought I knew disappeared out the door, leaving behind nothing but silence and shattered memories. The silence after Jenna left was deafening. The house, once filled with the hum of her laughter and Emily's chatter, now felt like a tomb. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, the events of the evening replaying in my mind like a broken record. I kept thinking about that guy, his smirk, his arrogance, the casual way he acted like he had every right to be in my home. Home! What a joke! The place I'd spent years building into a sanctuary for my family now felt tainted, like the walls themselves were complicit in her betrayal. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, my hand shaking as I brought it to my lips. The burn was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to make the pain stop. But instead, I just sat there, letting the anger simmer beneath the surface. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the heavy quiet. I glanced at the screen, a text from my best friend, Marcus. Marcus, yo man, saw Jenna at Tess's. Everything good? I stared at the message for a long moment, my stomach twisting. Marcus was one of the few people who knew Jenna well. He'd introduced us back in college. The idea of telling him what had happened felt like admitting my failure out loud, but I also couldn't ignore him. Me nope. She cheated. Kicked her out tonight. His response came almost instantly. Marcus, what? The hell? You serious? Me. Dead serious. I could practically feel his outrage through the screen. Marcus, you need me to come over? Bring booze, baseball bats, anything? I managed a small, bitter smile at that. Marcus always had my back, no matter what. But as much as I appreciated the offer, I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. Not even with him. Me nah. Just need some time. I'll hit you up soon. His response was a simple thumbs-up emoji, but I knew he'd be there whenever I was ready. For now, though, I needed to process this on my own. As the hours dragged on, I found myself wandering through the house, my mind racing. I went into Emily's room, sitting on the edge of her tiny bed and running my hand over the soft pink comforter. She was spending the night at her friend's house, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in her family. How the hell was I supposed to explain this to her? How do you tell a 6-year-old that the person she idolizes, her mother, betrayed everything we'd built? I closed my eyes, trying to push the thought away, but it was no use. Memories of Jenna flooded my mind. Our wedding day, the birth of our daughter, lazy Sunday mornings spent laughing over pancakes. How could someone who'd been my partner through so much throw it all away for what? A thrill? A distraction? I needed answers, but I doubted I'd ever get the ones that made sense. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with a pounding headache and a blanket draped over me, something I must have grabbed in the middle of the night. The whiskey bottle was empty on the coffee table, a reminder of my pathetic attempt to drown the pain. I groaned, rubbing my temples as I forced myself upright. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. Marcus, dude, you need to do something about this. Don't just sit there and wallow. I sighed, typing out a quick response. Me working on it. The truth was, I wasn't sure what working on it even meant. All I knew was that I couldn't let Jenna walk away from this unscathed. She destroyed our marriage, humiliated me in my own home. And for what? She didn't get to move on like nothing had happened. I got up, pacing the living room as I mulled over my next steps. Divorce was inevitable. There was no coming back from this. But that wasn't enough. Jenna needed to feel the weight of what she'd done, to understand the consequences of her choices. That's when an idea began to form. A crazy, vengeful idea. It was risky, sure, and it would require some careful planning. But if it worked, it would be the kind of poetic justice they write books about. I pulled out my laptop, the gears in my head turning as I started to put together a plan. If Jenna thought she could waltz out of my life without repercussions, she was about to learn otherwise. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming control, about showing her, and myself, that I wasn't the kind of man who rolled over and let people walk all over him. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of my laptop. I sat at the dining table, a notepad beside me, scribbling ideas as they came. Every time I thought about Jenna's smug lover, the way he'd kissed her cheek like I was some kind of background noise in his personal drama, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about Jenna anymore, it was about him too. I didn't just want to hurt them. I wanted to outsmart them, to leave them questioning every move they'd made. First, I needed to know who the guy was. I had no idea where Jenna had met him, or even his name. But I wasn't completely clueless. I remembered the make and model of the silver sedan he'd parked outside my house. Thank God for pharmaceutical sales. I'd spent years memorizing details about clients and competitors. This was no different. I grabbed my phone and called a buddy of mine, Dave, who worked at the DMV. Dave was the kind of guy who loved to flaunt his access to information, especially when a friend needed a favor. Andy, my man, Dave greeted, his voice cheerful. What's up? Hey, Dave. I need a favor. A big one. Name it. I explained the situation as vaguely as I could, leaving out the gory details. I need to know who owns a car. It's a silver sedan, late model. The plates start with JXB. Can you look it up? There was a pause on the line. You know this is technically illegal, right? I snorted. Come on, Dave. Since when have you cared about technically illegal? He laughed. Fair point. All right. Give me a sec. I waited, tapping my pen against the table. After a couple of minutes, Dave came back on the line. Got it? The car's registered to a Mark Townsend. Lives in Westbrook. Westbrook. Of course. That explained Jenna's late nights. Her job sometimes took her to that area for site inspections. The pieces were falling into place, and with each one, my anger flared brighter. Thanks, man. You're a lifesaver. Just don't tell me what this is about, Dave said with a chuckle. Ignorance is bliss. Deal. I hung up and jotted down the name. Mark Townsend. Now I had a target. But if I was going to pull this off, I needed more than just his name and address. I needed leverage. For the next few days, I played the role of the dutiful father and scorned husband. I kept up appearances, getting Emily to school on time, smiling politely at neighbors who asked how things were going. But every spare moment was spent digging into Mark's life. Social media, LinkedIn, anything I could find. Turns out Mark wasn't just some random guy. He owned a small contracting business, a profitable one, judging by the photos of his boat and ski trips. He had a wife, too, though she was noticeably absent from his recent posts. Trouble in paradise, maybe? Good. That might work to my advantage. I found out his business relied heavily on online reviews. His Yelp page and Google business listing were filled with glowing testimonials from clients. Mark had built his livelihood on his reputation, and that gave me an idea. A way to hit him where it hurt. But I wasn't going to do anything reckless or illegal. No, this had to be clean, smart, and impossible to trace back to me. Late one night, after Emily was asleep, I sat at my laptop with a fresh glass of whiskey and began crafting my masterpiece. It started with an anonymous email to a few local news outlets, hinting at unethical practices at Mark's company. Nothing too detailed, just enough to make them curious. Then I created a fake account on a neighborhood forum, posing as a disgruntled former client. I painted a picture of shoddy work, overcharging, and broken promises. It wasn't enough to destroy him outright, but it was a start, a crack in his carefully constructed facade. Next, I focused on Jenna. Her betrayal deserved its own special brand of justice, and I wasn't going to let her get off easy. I started gathering every piece of evidence I had: the text I'd pulled from her phone, the credit card statements showing the wine and hotel receipts she hadn't bothered to hide. My lawyer would love this treasure trove. But that wasn't all. Jenna had always been protective of her image, especially at work. I knew her company valued integrity above all else. What would happen if her boss got wind of her extracurricular activities? I drafted an anonymous email detailing her affair with Mark and attaching the relevant proof. I didn't send it yet. Timing was everything. By the time the week was over, I had all the pieces in place. I felt a strange sense of calm, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Jenna had underestimated me. So had Mark. They thought I'd roll over, take the betrayal, and move on. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. By now, I'd gone from heartbreak to something colder. Calculated. I'd always been the steady, predictable guy, the one people could count on to do the right thing. But this wasn't about doing the right thing anymore. It was about showing Jenna and her new friend, Mark, that there were consequences for tearing apart everything I'd worked so hard to build. The first part of the plan was simple: gather more information. Mark Townsend might have been a hotshot contractor, but even hotshots had skeletons in their closets. I hired a private investigator, worth every penny, and it didn't take long for the dirt to surface. Mark's business wasn't quite as squeaky clean as his online reviews suggested. He'd cut corners on a few big projects, resulting in lawsuits that were quietly settled. He'd also had a couple of OSHA violations that hadn't made it to the public eye. And then there was his personal life. His wife, Claire, had filed for separation just 6 months ago, citing irreconcilable differences. Guess she hadn't been a fan of his extracurricular activities either. Armed with this new information, I decided it was time to make my first move. Nothing too drastic, just a little nudge to shake their foundations. I started with Mark. On a Tuesday morning, while Emily was at school and the house was mercifully quiet, I created a burner email account and sent a carefully worded message to one of Mark's biggest clients. I didn't accuse him outright. I wasn't stupid, but I hinted at the lawsuits and OSHA violations, including a link to the court documents the PI had found. I signed off as a concerned citizen and hit send. Next, I turned my attention to Jenna. I wasn't ready to unleash the full wrath of the evidence I collected, but I couldn't resist a small taste of revenge. Using another burner account, I sent her a cryptic email with no subject line and just 3 words. I know everything. No details, no threats, just enough to make her sweat. That night, as I was putting Emily to bed, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was Jenna. Jenna. Andy, we need to talk. Please. I stared at the screen, a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness washing over me. The old me, the one who loved her unconditionally, might have been tempted to reply, to hear her out. But that guy was gone. So I put my phone down and went back to Emily's room, ignoring the buzzing that followed. The next day, things started to unravel. Mark's business clients were pulling out of deals left and right. Jenna showed up unannounced, knocking on the door like a lost child. I didn't let her in. Andy, she pleaded through the door, please. Just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I opened the door, just enough to look her in the eye. 5 minutes to say what? To explain why you betrayed me? To justify why you thought it was okay to screw some contractor while I was working to give you and Emily everything you wanted? Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I made a mistake, she whispered. A terrible mistake. But I still love you. I want to fix this. I shook my head, disgusted. Love? You don't get to call it love after what you've done. Love isn't a mistake, Jenna. It's a choice. And you made yours. I shut the door before she could respond. The sound of her sobs muffled as I walked away. I wanted to feel triumphant, but all I felt was empty. The days that followed were a blur of calculated moves. The private investigator found out that Mark's wife, Claire, had been keeping tabs on him, too. Apparently, she'd suspected his infidelity long before I came into the picture. I debated reaching out to her, but decided to bide my time. If Claire wanted to burn Mark's life to the ground, I'd gladly hand her the matches when the moment was right. Meanwhile, Jenna kept trying to contact me. Texts, calls, even showing up at Emily's school drop-off, hoping to corner me. I ignored her every time. My lawyer had already started drafting the divorce papers, and as far as I was concerned, the only conversations we'd have going forward would involve custody arrangements and property division. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The real revenge was still brewing, and when it came, it would hit them like a freight train. They thought they could tear my life apart and walk away unscathed. They thought wrong. I kept myself busy over the next few days, preparing for the final phase of my plan. The satisfaction of watching Mark's business crumble was sweet, but it wasn't enough. Jenna had spent years building her pristine image. Wife, mother, career woman. She wore it like armor, and now I was going to strip it away piece by piece. The first strike came on a Thursday morning. Jenna's boss, a no-nonsense woman named Karen who valued loyalty above all else, received an anonymous envelope. Inside were copies of Jenna's hotel receipts, timestamps that matched her late nights at work, and a single damning photo. Jenna and Mark, caught in an unguarded moment outside a restaurant, his hand on the small of her back. It wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. The implication was enough. I'd included a note, typed in plain font, with just one sentence. Is this the kind of integrity your company stands for? I could almost picture Karen opening the envelope, her mouth tightening as she connected the dots. Jenna prided herself on being a rising star at her engineering firm. This was bound to shake things up. That afternoon, I got the first sign that my move had hit its mark. Jenna texted me. Jenna, did you send something to my job? Andy, if this is you, please don't do this. You're going to ruin everything. I didn't reply. She could stew in her anxiety for a while. Let her wonder how much worse it could get. The truth was I wasn't done. Not even close. The second strike was aimed at Mark. I'd been sitting on a gold mine of dirt from the private investigator, waiting for the right moment to use it. It wasn't just the OSHA violations or the lawsuits. Those were bad enough, but they didn't carry the same sting as personal humiliation. Mark's wife, Claire, became my unwitting ally. I sent her a package with everything I had. The photos, the texts, even a snippet of the video I'd recorded of Mark leaving my house that fateful day. No note, no return address. Just a simple USB drive and a copy of his latest online review, glowing with praise for his honesty and professionalism. It didn't take long for her to react. A day later, Mark's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. Claire had shared everything publicly. She tagged his business, their mutual friends, even his clients. The fallout was immediate. Townsend Contracting became the talk of the local community forum, but not in the way Mark wanted. The accusations of shoddy work and infidelity piled up, and soon his 5-star ratings began to plummet. I wasn't surprised when the PI informed me that his wife had officially filed for divorce. By the weekend, the storm had reached Jenna. She showed up at the house again, looking disheveled and desperate. Andy, please, she begged, standing on the porch. You've made your point. I get it, but you're hurting Emily in the process. Can't we just sit down and talk? I stepped outside, closing the door behind me, so Emily wouldn't hear. This isn't about her, I said, my tone flat. This is about you and the choices you made. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sympathy, only a cold satisfaction. I'm sorry, she said for the 100th time. I know I screwed up, but this isn't the way to fix it. You're only making things worse. Worse for you, I corrected. Not for me. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. I loved you, Jenna, I said, my voice breaking despite my resolve. I trusted you, and you threw it all away. Now you're reaping what you sowed. For a moment, she just stood there, silent and defeated. Then she turned and walked back to her car, her shoulders slumped. As I watched her drive away, I felt a strange mix of triumph and sadness. Revenge might be satisfying, but it didn't fill the emptiness she'd left behind. Later that night, Marcus came over with a six-pack. We sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "You good?" he asked, cracking open a beer and handing me one. I took a sip, the cold liquid soothing my dry throat. "Getting there," I said. "One step at a time." "Jenna's still blowing up your phone?" "Constantly." He smirked, shaking his head. "You're a better man than me. I'd have put her and that guy in the same ditch by now." I laughed, the sound bitter. "Trust me, I thought about it. But this is better. Let them suffer in their own mess." Marcus raised his beer in a mock toast. "To poetic justice." I clinked my bottle against his. "And to moving on." But even as I said the words, I knew this chapter wasn't quite over yet. There was one more move to make. One final strike that would ensure neither Jenna nor Mark would ever forget the lesson they'd learned. The weekend rolled by slowly, every hour stretching out like a rubber band about to snap. Jenna had gone radio silent since our last confrontation, which suited me just fine. Emily was oblivious to the chaos swirling beneath the surface, her innocent chatter a welcome distraction as we baked cookies and watched her favorite cartoons. But beneath the calm exterior, I was preparing for the grand finale. The idea hit me late Saturday night, as I stared at my laptop, the cursor blinking on the document where I'd been compiling everything I knew about Mark and Jenna's little escapade. It wasn't enough to take them down separately. I wanted them to implode from within, and I had just the way to make that happen. The key was Claire, Mark's soon-to-be ex-wife. She'd already lit the match that was burning his business to the ground. If anyone deserved to know the full extent of his betrayal, it was her. But what if she knew about Jenna too? What if the two women who'd been played against each other united, if only for a brief, explosive moment? The next morning, after dropping Emily off at a playdate, I sent Claire an anonymous message through one of the fake accounts I'd created. This one was a little less cryptic than the others. I introduced myself as someone who understands what you're going through and offered her the rest of the puzzle pieces, proof of Jenna's role in Mark's life and the timeline of their affair. I even attached screenshots of Jenna's texts and receipts. Then I sat back and waited. It didn't take long. By mid-afternoon, Claire had responded. "Claire, who are you? How do you know all this?" I smiled, typing back. "Me, just someone who believes the truth should come out. Do with it what you will." Her reply was almost instant. "Claire, thank you. That was it. No follow-up questions, no pleas for more information." She'd said everything she needed to with those 2 words. I had no doubt she'd take that truth and wield it like a weapon. By Monday morning, the fallout was in full swing. I didn't hear from Jenna. She was still blocked, but Marcus sent me a screenshot of a post Claire had made on a local Facebook group. She'd laid it all out. The affair, the lies, even naming Jenna as Mark's accomplice. The comment section was a battlefield, with people weighing in on everything from Mark's business ethics to Jenna's morality. The post didn't just ripple, it exploded. Mark's reputation was already in tatters, and now Jenna's was circling the drain too. Her co-workers began commenting, some in disbelief, others claiming they'd suspected something for a while. By lunchtime, Jenna's company had released a statement distancing itself from her personal actions and confirming that she was no longer employed there. Marcus called me around noon, his voice brimming with excitement. "Dude, have you seen this? Jenna's getting roasted alive. Mark, too. This is next level." I chuckled, though the sound felt hollow. "Yeah, I saw. It's what they deserve." "You okay, though?" he asked, his tone softening. "I know this was the plan, but still, I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. "Just glad it's over." And it was, mostly. That night, after putting Emily to bed, I sat on the porch with another glass of whiskey. The air was cool, the stars scattered across the sky like tiny pinpricks of light. I should have felt triumphant. I'd done what I set out to do, brought them both to their knees. But instead, all I felt was tired. Jenna had reached out again earlier in the day, leaving me a voicemail this time. Her voice was shaky, desperate. "Andy, I don't know how much more of this I can take. Please, if you're the one behind all this, stop. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry for everything. Just please." I deleted it without listening to the rest. The truth was, I didn't regret what I'd done. They deserved every ounce of the fallout. But revenge wasn't the salve I'd thought it would be. It didn't erase the betrayal or fill the void Jenna had left in her wake. It didn't change the fact that Emily would grow up with divorced parents, or that I'd have to explain, someday, why her mother wasn't the person we thought she was. I sighed, draining the last of my whiskey and setting the glass down beside me. Tomorrow, I'd start rebuilding. For Emily. For myself. The wreckage Jenna and Mark had left behind was theirs to sort through now. I was done. Tuesday morning came with a strange sense of clarity. The storm I'd unleashed had passed, leaving behind a silence that was equal parts eerie and comforting. Jenna hadn't tried to contact me again, and neither had Claire. As far as I knew, Mark was still dealing with the fallout from his crumbling business. For the first time in weeks, I didn't wake up feeling like I was balancing on the edge of a knife. But life doesn't pause, even in the aftermath of disaster. Emily still needed to be dropped off at school. Bills still had to be paid. The laundry didn't magically do itself. So I got up, showered, and faced the day like any other, even though everything had changed. I couldn't help but wonder what Jenna was doing. Was she sitting in her sister's spare room, scrolling through her phone, reading all the comments that had turned her name into a local punchline? Was Mark beside her, trying to salvage what was left of his dignity? Or had he already cut and run? The thought gave me little satisfaction. I was too drained to care. At work, I kept my head down, focusing on my sales calls and trying to avoid the well-meaning but intrusive questions from co-workers who'd heard whispers about my marital troubles. One of them, Karen from HR, cornered me in the break room. "Heard you're going through some stuff," she said, her tone soft but probing. I forced a polite smile. "Yeah, it's been a rough couple of weeks." She nodded, her face full of sympathy. "If you ever need to talk, you know where to find me." "Thanks, Karen," I said, quickly grabbing my coffee and making a beeline back to my desk. The last thing I needed was to turn the office into a therapy session. That evening, as I sat on the couch scrolling through Netflix, my phone buzzed with a text. I sighed, half expecting it to be Jenna again, but it wasn't. It was Marcus. Marcus. "Dinner tomorrow?" My treat. I stared at the message for a moment, debating whether I had the energy to face the world outside my house. But Marcus had been there for me through all of this, and I owed him at least that much. Me sure. Where? Marcus, that steak place on Main, 7 p.m. The next evening, I met Marcus at the restaurant. He was already at the bar, nursing a beer and chatting up the bartender when I arrived. "Look who decided to show up," he said with a grin, clapping me on the back as I sat down beside him. "You look like hell, by the way." "Thanks," I said dryly, flagging down the bartender for a whiskey. Just what I needed to hear. He laughed, taking a swig of his beer. "Seriously, though, how you holding up?" I shrugged. "Surviving. It's weird. Now that it's all out there, I don't know what to do with myself." "Start fresh," he said simply. "You're free now. No more lies, no more games. You can do whatever the hell you want." I nodded, sipping my whiskey. "Yeah, but what does that even look like?" For the past 7 years, everything I've done has been about Jenna and Emily. Now it's just Emily. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me. "That's not a bad thing, man. Emily's your anchor. Focus on her. The rest will fall into place." He was right, of course. Emily was my priority. She always had been. But the idea of starting over, of rebuilding my life from scratch, was overwhelming. Where did I even begin? The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and laughter, an odd but welcome contrast to the chaos of recent weeks. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe this was my chance to start fresh. When I got home, the house was quiet. Emily was asleep, her tiny snores drifting down the hall. I peeked into her room, watching her for a moment, my heart aching with a mix of love and regret. She deserved better than this mess, better than what Jenna and I had given her. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed again. Another text, but this time it wasn't from Jenna or Marcus. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Unknown number. I think we need to talk. Claire. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Claire. Mark's wife. What could she possibly want? Had I pushed too far? Was she angry about what I'd sent her? Or was this something else entirely? I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. This wasn't over, not yet. Whatever Claire wanted, I had a feeling it was about to throw another wrench into my already chaotic life. The text from Claire rattled me more than I expected. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to reply. What could she possibly want? Had I gone too far by involving her? Was she here to berate me for dragging her into my revenge? I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, before typing back. Me? What do you want to talk about? The reply came almost instantly. Claire, not over text. Can we meet? Tomorrow. Coffee shop on 5th, 11 a.m. I hesitated. What could she say that couldn't be handled over text? But curiosity won out in the end. Me fine. See you there. The next morning, I dropped Emily off at school and made my way to the coffee shop. It was a small, quiet place tucked away from the main road, perfect for a conversation I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to have. Claire was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed, and her blonde hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. Andy, she said as I approached, standing up briefly before sitting back down. Thanks for meeting me. I nodded, taking the seat across from her. What's this about? She sighed, wrapping her hands around her cup. First, I want to say thank you for telling me the truth. About Mark, I don't think I would have found out otherwise. I shrugged. You deserve to know. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the table for a moment before meeting mine again. But that's not why I wanted to meet. There's something you need to know. Something about Jenna. My stomach tightened at the mention of her name. What about her? Claire hesitated, as if trying to find the right words. Mark and Jenna's affair, it wasn't just a fling. It wasn't just about sex. There's more to it. What are you saying? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She reached in her purse and pulled out a small folder, sliding it across the table to me. I hired a private investigator months ago, before I even knew about you. I suspected Mark was cheating, but I didn't know with who. This is what he found. I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the pages inside. There were photos of Mark and Jenna, more than I'd seen before, meeting at different locations, their body language intimate, familiar. There were hotel receipts, timestamps. But what caught my eye was a series of emails between them. The tone wasn't just flirty, it was strategic. What is this? I asked, my voice low. Claire leaned forward, her expression serious. Mark and Jenna were planning something. From what I could piece together, they were talking about starting a business together. Using your money. I froze, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. My money? She nodded. Jenna told Mark she could get access to your accounts. They were talking about setting up a shell company, funneling money through it. I don't know how far they got, but they were serious, Andy. My mind reeled. Jenna hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd been planning to rob me blind. My blood ran cold as I thought about the times she'd insisted on handling the bills, the joint account she persuaded me to open. Why are you telling me this? I asked, finally, my voice tight. Claire's expression softened, and for a moment, I saw the pain behind her steely exterior. Because I know what it feels like to be blindsided by someone you thought you knew. And because Mark deserves to go down for this. Both of them do. I clenched my fists, my anger bubbling to the surface. What do you want me to do? She shrugged. Whatever you think is right. But I thought you should have the full picture before you decide. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her revelation settling between us. Finally, I nodded. Thanks for telling me. She gave me a small, sad smile. Take care of yourself, Andy. And your daughter. She's lucky to have you. With that, she stood and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me alone with the folder and the burning rage simmering inside me. I flipped through the documents again, my mind racing. Jenna and Mark had been planning to steal from me, to ruin me financially while I was none the wiser. The betrayal was deeper than I'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about protecting myself and Emily from people who had shown they were willing to destroy us for their own gain. And I knew exactly what my next move would be. The rest of the day passed in a haze, my thoughts consumed by the revelation Claire had handed me. Every time I tried to focus, my mind replayed her words. Using your money, funneling it through a shell company. They were serious, Andy. By the time Emily was asleep, I made up my mind. If Jenna and Mark wanted to play dirty, I was more than ready to beat them at their own game. I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to make sure they never had the chance to do this to anyone else again. The first step was calling my lawyer. Andy, this is serious, he said after I explained what Claire had shown me. If they were conspiring to embezzle money from you, that's fraud. You could press charges. I'm not sure it ever got that far, I admitted. But I need to know if they tried. Can you recommend someone to dig into Jenna's accounts? He didn't hesitate. I'll put you in touch with a forensic accountant. They can comb through everything, joint accounts, credit cards, even her personal finances. If there's anything suspicious, they'll find it. Perfect. Let's do it. The next morning, I met with the forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Rita, who wasted no time getting to work. Within hours, she was deep into Jenna's financial history, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she analyzed bank statements and transaction records. While she worked, I reached out to Claire again. Did your PI find anything about where they were planning to set up this shell company? Her reply came quickly. Claire, yes. There's a name, Westbrook Development Group. Mark registered it 6 months ago, but it doesn't seem to have done any business yet. Westbrook. Of course. That's where Mark lived and where Jenna had been spending so much time working late. I added the name to my growing list of evidence and passed it along to Rita. By the end of the week, we had a full picture. Jenna and Mark had opened a joint account under Westbrook Development Group, with several deposits made using my money. Small amounts at first, hundreds of dollars here and there, nothing that would raise red flags. But over time, the amounts grew. Thousands of dollars siphoned from our joint account, hidden in plain sight. The betrayal hit me like a gut punch. She hadn't just lied to me, she'd stolen from me. And she'd done it with a level of deceit I hadn't thought possible. Rita handed me a folder with all the evidence neatly compiled. This is enough to pursue legal action, she said. You could sue her for fraud and recover what she took. But that wasn't enough. Legal action might get my money back, but it wouldn't make her or Mark face the consequences of their actions. I wanted them to feel the full weight of what they'd done. That's when I came up with the plan. Step 1. Public exposure. Using a burner email account, I sent the evidence to every local media outlet in town. I included copies of the bank statements, proof of the shell company, and the timeline of Jenna and Mark's affair. I didn't hold back. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd show them what real exposure looked like. Step 2. Legal leverage. I filed a lawsuit against Jenna for fraud and financial misconduct. My lawyer assured me that the case was airtight, and the court would almost certainly rule in my favor. Mark, meanwhile, faced his own set of problems. Claire had already filed for divorce, and now his fraudulent activities were about to be dragged into the spotlight. Step 3. The final blow. The last piece of the puzzle was Emily. I didn't want her caught in the crossfire, but I also knew I needed to protect her from Jenna's influence. I filed for full custody, citing Jenna's betrayal and financial dishonesty as evidence that she wasn't fit to parent. My lawyer was optimistic, given the strength of our case and the evidence I'd gathered. By the end of the week, the wheels were in motion. Jenna and Mark had no idea what was coming, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control of my life. That night, as I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, Marcus called. "How's it going, man?" he asked. "Busy," I said with a dry laugh. "But good. I think I've got them where I want them." "Good," he said. "They deserve everything coming their way." I nodded, staring out into the night. He was right. They did. And by the time I was done, they'd wish they'd never crossed me. The storm I'd unleashed roared into full force. Jenna and Mark had played their game, but now they were trapped in a maze of consequences, each turn closing in tighter around them. It started with the media. By midweek, local news outlets were running stories on the scandal. Fraud and infidelity rock local business owner and rising engineer. The articles didn't name me, but anyone who knew our community could connect the dots. Social media lit up, with threads dissecting every detail of the affair and financial deceit. Jenna's carefully curated image of a devoted wife and professional was obliterated overnight. Next came the legal fallout. Jenna was served with papers at her sister's house. She tried calling me after that, but I let it go to voicemail. The message was short and tearful. "Andy, please. Let's talk about this. We can fix it." There was nothing left to fix. Mark wasn't faring much better. His contracting business had already taken a hit from Claire's earlier expose, but now the fraud allegations and news coverage were driving the final nails into its coffin. Clients canceled contracts. His Yelp page was flooded with one-star reviews, and rumors of bankruptcy swirled through the community. I heard through the grapevine that Mark had started drinking heavily, spiraling under the weight of his crumbling life. Part of me wanted to feel bad for him, for both of them, but every time I thought about what they'd planned to do, the pity evaporated. They'd made their choices. Now they were living with the consequences. The most important part of all this was Emily. My lawyer had filed for full custody, and the evidence we'd gathered made it a strong case. Jenna tried to fight it, of course, but her position was weak. The court wasn't interested in her tears or pleas. They cared about the facts, and the facts were damning. During the hearing, I sat quietly as Jenna's lawyer tried to paint her as a misunderstood woman who'd made a few mistakes. But when it was my lawyer's turn, she presented the evidence with precision and clarity. The affair, the financial fraud, the emails detailing her plan to siphon money from our accounts. Jenna sat there, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't even look at me. When the judge ruled in my favor, granting me full custody and supervised visitation for Jenna, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. I'd won, but it was a hollow victory. Emily's life would never be the same, and that wasn't something I celebrated. A few days after the custody ruling, Jenna showed up at the house unannounced. I opened the door, finding her standing there with red-rimmed eyes and a trembling lower lip. "Can we talk?" she asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. She walked in, her gaze scanning the familiar space. I don't know where to start," she said, her voice breaking. "Try the truth," I said, crossing my arms. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was stupid, Andy. I was selfish. I let myself get caught up in something that didn't matter, and now I've lost everything." I wanted to believe her, but the damage was too deep. "Why, Jenna?" I asked. "Why did you do it? Was I not enough for you?" Her sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands. "I don't know." I felt restless, like I was stuck in a routine, and Mark made me feel alive. "But it wasn't worth it, Andy. None of it was worth losing you." I shook my head, the anger and sadness bubbling up again. "You didn't just lose me, Jenna. You lost Emily. You lost our family." "For what?" "Some thrill." She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, broken and silent. I took a deep breath, my voice softening. "I don't hate you, Jenna, but I don't love you anymore, either. I can't. You killed that part of me." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything." I didn't respond. What was there to say? Her apologies wouldn't change what she'd done. After she left, I sat in the quiet house, feeling a strange sense of closure. The chapter with Jenna was over. The anger, the pain, the need for revenge, it was all behind me now. All that mattered was moving forward, for Emily and for myself. In the months that followed, life slowly began to stabilize. Emily and I found a rhythm, our days filled with laughter and quiet moments of healing. Jenna moved out of town, taking a job in another state to escape the shame and start over. Mark disappeared from the local scene entirely, his business shuttered and his reputation in ruins. As for me, I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I'd been through hell, but I'd come out stronger on the other side. And if there was one thing I'd learned, it was this: People will betray you. Life will knock you down. But as long as you keep standing, keep fighting, you can rebuild. You can survive. And sometimes, survival is the best revenge of all.